Chapter 13 of Nip and Tuck by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 13, in which Tuck walks into a trap. The irate broker walked up to Tuck, who was standing by the window waiting for Mr. Bloodgood to join him. "Did you buy that block of Chesapeake and Fairleigh stock?" he roared into the boy's ear. "Yes, sir," replied Tuck, wheeling about and looking him squarely in the eye. "What did you want with it?" "Excuse me, sir, but I don't think it's anybody's business but my own." "You don't, do you? I say it's my business, you little jackanapes." "I have no wish to talk to you on the subject, Mr. Savage," answered Tuck coolly. "But I propose to talk with you, you little monkey. Who'd you buy it for?" "I decline to tell you." "I insist on knowing," howled Savage in a tone which caused every clerk in the place to get interested in the discussion. "Mr. Bloodgood, are you ready?" asked Tuck, walking up to his old boss. "I want you to answer me, confound you!" roared Broker Savage, catching the boy by the arm. "Take your hand from my arm, please," demanded Tuck, in a tone which unconsciously had an effect on the stout broker, for he released the boy. "Will you sell me that stock at a quarter advance on what you gave for it?" Savage said, although it was like pulling teeth for him to make this offer, but he had sense enough to see that the boy had the best of the argument. "No, sir, I will not." "Don't you know that's a full point ahead of the market price?" "I'm not denying, but it may be." "What will you sell it for?" "It is not for sale at this moment." "What do you mean, you whippersnapper?" roared Broker Savage with a venomous glance at the boy. "I said it was not for sale, and I think that's all that is necessary for me to say." "You mean you won't sell it to me?" "I'm not offering it to anybody," replied Tuck, turning away. "Look here, young man, I offer you 17.5 for that block of stock, and I want it delivered to my office not later than 2 o'clock. If you fail to be on hand with it, I promise this will be the worst day's work you ever did in your life." Broker Savage uttered this threat in no uncertain terms, and the malignant look which accompanied the words showed that he was not to be trifled with. Clearly Mr. Savage was determined to get the stock in his possession, or there promised to be trouble. George Tuck, however, was not a boy to be easily frightened into doing something against his will. "Look here, Mr. Savage," retorted the boy broker in a low, tense tone, intended for the stockbroker's ear only. "You had better not threaten me. Do you understand? I happen to know why you want that block of stock so badly. Those shares would give the clique you represent control of the company and pave the way to your election to the presidency. You expect that a certain judge of the Virginia Court of Appeals will hand down a decision at 2 o'clock this afternoon, favorable to the railroad company in its suit against the Virginia Coal and Iron Company. Perhaps you are not aware," sarcastically, "that somebody has sent this judge in question $10,000 for the purpose of influencing his decision. That looks very much as if there was bribery in the background, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if a New York lawyer by the name of Dexter could throw some light on the subject if the matter should happen to be investigated." To say that Broker Savage was fairly staggered by this unexpected revelation on the part of the boy he hated would be telling nothing short of the truth. With bulging eyes and parted lips he watched Tuck and Mr. Bloodgood leave the office, and then, with a snarl, not unmixed with a cold shiver as to possible future developments, he followed them and went directly to his own office. For the next 15 minutes he was busy calling up diverse parties on his telephone. Later on he had a number of rather excited callers who were closeted with him for some time in his private room. Then the conference broke up. The gentlemen were dismissed by a private door into the main corridor, and Mr. Savage, with a look of determination on his face, put on his hat and overcoat and left the office himself, leaving word that he would not be back again that day. In the meantime, Tuck paid for and got possession of the 20,500 shares of Chesapeake and Fairleigh stock, took them over to his office, and put them in his safe. It had taken the greater part of his bank account to put the deal through, but he felt reasonably sure that Duncan Jarrett would gladly take them off his hands at the price he paid for the shares plus his commission. In any case, he believed that as soon as the decision of the Virginia Court of Appeals was known to be favorable to the Chesapeake and Fairleigh Railroad, the price would advance on the exchange. That afternoon he was honored by a visit from Miss Laura Joyce and her friend Mira Clark. They spent a very pleasant half-hour with him, and then the three walked across the corridor and surprised Nicholas Nip in his new suite of offices, which the girls declared to be just lovely. Miss Clark had been persuaded by Laura to try her luck in Wall Street, and she had brought with her $1,000, which she asked Mr. Nip to invest for her as he thought best. Of course, Nip was delighted at this bit of confidence on the part of his fair charmer, and he resolved he would see her through successfully if it cost him a pretty penny himself to do it. This meant that Nicholas Nip was rather smitten with the pretty young miss. That evening, when Nip and Tuck closed their offices and started uptown by the Underground Railway, they were followed by a couple of well-dressed but rather hard-looking individuals. That Nip had no share in their attention was shown by the fact that both of them alighted at 125th Street and Lenox Avenue, where Tuck left the train. They shadowed him to his home from there. Making sure they would know the house again, they passed up on 7th Avenue and walked down to 125th Street, where they entered a saloon near the Harlem Opera House. Taking seats at one of the polished round tables, they ordered a succession of drinks and cigars, and put in an hour in a manner apparently agreeable to themselves. About this time a carriage stopped in front of the saloon. The driver dismounted from his perch and entered the place. He called for a drink at the bar, then looked about the saloon, as if in search of someone. He looked at the two men who had been so long seated at the table and made a sign to them, which they evidently understood, for they followed him out to the sidewalk. One of them mounted beside the driver, and the other got into the carriage. Then the vehicle drove off. It came to a halt in front of the brownstone house where Tuck and his parents lived. The man got outside, went up the steps, and rang the bell. "Mr. George Tuck in?" he inquired of the girl who answered the ring. "Yes, sir." "Please hand him this letter." "Will you step inside, sir?" The man did so and waited in the hall while the girl was absent. Tuck came upstairs from the basement where he had been finishing his supper. The open note he held in his hand read as follows: "My dear Tuck, I wish to see you at my house this evening on a matter of the greatest importance and send my carriage to fetch you. I have only just returned from Philadelphia and expect to go to Boston by the midnight train. Sincerely yours, Duncan Jarrett." "Mr. Jarrett will only detain you half an hour," said the man who stood in the hall. "The carriage is outside." "Very well," replied Tuck, unsuspicious that anything was wrong about this invitation from the millionaire operator, whom he was eager to acquaint with the information that he had bought the block of Chesapeake and Fairleigh stock which would give him control of the road. "I'll be ready in a moment." He took his hat and overcoat from the rack and put them on. Then he ran downstairs and told his father he had an engagement with Mr. Jarrett, handing him the note by way of explanation. Then he rejoined the man in the hall above, who, with a covert smile of satisfaction, led the way to the carriage and held the door open for him to enter. End of chapter 13.